All right, welcome back to another episode of Modern Cyber, our annual RSA recap episode. And if the background looks familiar, that's because it should be. We've recorded in almost exactly the same spot for the last 3 years running. But if the guest looks different, that is real. So Mikko, who has done our recaps for the last couple of years, didn't make it to RSA this year. So we had to replace him from somebody who lives in a very close by country of Estonia. Joseph Carson, thank you so much for joining us on Modern Cyber.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here. And Mikko, you are awesome. And it's such an honor to be filling your shoes, because it's big shoes to fill.
Big shoes to fill, indeed. So let's get into it. A couple things. So I want to go over a recap of the conference. And, this is I call it one of the 2 to 3 major biggest cyber events of the year. Global in scope. People come in from, I think I've met people from at least 4 or 5 continents. But I'm also, So, people come in from everywhere to learn, to network, all that good stuff. So any high level first observations, big thematic things that stuck out to you this year?
Mm-hmm. So absolutely. I mean, one of the things is, I love the theme this year. Okay. The RSAC community, the RSAC conference, it's all about community.
Yeah.
And I think that's one of the things is definitely we all need to come together. We need to share our knowledge. We need to learn from each other so that we can accelerate and make the world a safer place. So the theme is amazing.
Yeah.
Big observations. It felt like more like an AI conference than a cybersecurity conference.
Yeah.
So walking the trade floor, looking at the messages, AI was everywhere.
Yeah.
Agentic AI, was one of the biggest main themes here. A lot of the sessions, a lot of the talks.
Yeah.
It was covered a lot in the keynotes.
Yep.
Another big area was about identities and non-human identities.
Yep.
Another massive topic. And I was kind of like looking and trying to understand exactly. Sometimes it was felt as like what problem people were solving was a bit lost in the area.
Yeah.
But I felt like, it was such a great conference. The sessions I attended, I was lucky to attend some great sessions. I got to attend Rob Joyce's session, which was fantastic. I went to Paul Simmons. He did the Identity 101. So I really enjoyed sitting back. And it was kind of like an update on the old session we did years ago, adding a lot about agentic AI as well. I really enjoyed that.
Yeah.
And then the Microsoft keynote, I also really enjoyed as well.
Okay.
So that was awesome.
So let's come back to those for you in a sec, because I want to kind of double click on a couple of the things you said at the beginning. I agree with you. It felt very much like an AI conference with a side order of cybersecurity.
Absolutely.
And one of the things, to your point about kind of the message getting lost in there is, there's like cyber for AI, AI in cyber.
Yeah.
I literally don't think I saw a single booth that didn't have AI in it in some way, whether printed on it or whatever. Similarly, every session that I looked at in the catalog, and I didn't make it to many myself, had an AI component to it as well. I do wonder whether there is a risk in the industry as a whole that we over-index on this so heavily that we forget some of our cyber, like first principles, basics. Like, just remember, micro-segmentation is still a good idea. Least privilege is still a good idea, whether it is for AI and non-human identity or for humans and regular networks. So I worry about that a little bit, that, the noise and the interest levels and the hype around AI do bury some of the other core messages that are great reminders.
Absolutely. I mean, we have to do the fundamentals and we have to do them really well. And that was actually something that, Rob Joyce had mentioned during his session.
That's what I wanted to ask.
He said that, we had to do the basics really, really well.
Yeah.
AI is great because it can help you move faster.
Yeah.
But unless we get the basic things, the basic hygiene, make sure we have the right policies in place. We understand the risk, because putting a lot of tools in place will not help you be protected. It will help you move faster. So it's really important to understand where to go. And in the end, I do believe that AI is a good thing, but we had to make sure that, one thing is, we need it to be successful.
Yeah.
We can't deny that. For cybersecurity to be able to move at the pace and stay ahead of the cyber criminals and stay ahead of the attackers, we need AI. Because we need to be able, we're so under-resourced. We need to make sure that we're actually moving at a pace that stays ahead.
Yeah.
And AI helps us get there. I always say it's like the mushroom in Super Mario Kart that helps us move fast. Or it's like the fuel to the fire. It helps us accelerate.
Yeah.
So for me, we need it, but it also needs us.
Yeah.
So, because we need to put the right guardrails in place. We need to secure it. We need to protect it.
Yes.
We need to make sure it has the principle of least privilege, a zero trust, security by design, by default. So a lot of those means that, yes, I see the convergence. Maybe this conference is a really big indicator that these two areas, AI and cybersecurity, is converging together because they both need each other to be successful.
Yeah, I'll agree with that 100%. And Mikko and I have talked about this on the show before about, one of the big questions that I've gotten asked, and he as well, and I'm sure you have as well, is like, okay, great. Now there's all these AI capabilities. Who has the upper hand as a result of that? Attackers or defenders, right? And Mikko has made the argument that whoever masters it first and deploys it more effectively first, almost by definition, has an advantage in that realm. And I kind of get it, and I kind of agree with it. We do a series here, kind of a sub-series on modern cyber this week in AI security, weekly kind of like 10 to 15 minute episodes, and we cover stories from the last week. And one of the stories that we covered just this week was around the FBI producing evidence about 3 known, criminal actors, Chelan, Scattered Spider, and I can't remember who the third one was, where they have actual forensic data to show absolutely AI has been used in these attacks, whether it was in generating the phishing emails or whether it was in, probing an external attack surface or whatever the case may be. So gaining that upper hand is critical. Coming back to your point about Rob's talk on Identity 101, whether human or non-human, there's a couple areas of identity that have always been a challenge. Like, there are a couple things in my experience in my 25-ish year career in cybersecurity. We've never gotten that much better at vulnerability management and, reducing mean time to patch and things like that. And least privilege is one of those things where I feel like we've been talking about least privilege since I was a Windows NT4 admin in the late 90s. And, back then it was as simple as make sure that Jeremy's not in any, NT domain groups that he shouldn't be in, because that's how we assign permissions to folders on our file server. And it feels like it's still the same thing. So was there any insight from that session on how to think about managing identity better, or how to make better or faster progress towards least privilege?
Absolutely. One of the big things in this area is about, well, first of all, agentic AI, they have identities as well.
Right.
So first of all, you have to make sure, and there's a big question into, should it be a delegation of the human identity to the agentic agent? And I'm kind of big, it should not, because my agent should not be using my credentials.
Right.
It should be using ephemeral keys. It should be just in time. It should be temporary.
Yeah.
Because ultimately what makes me different from the agent is actually, there's usually contracts, there's legal agreements. And if I use my authentication and authorization for signature, then there's an implication of accountability to me.
Right.
Do I want to give my agent accountability to work on behalf of me?
Yeah.
For certain tasks, yes, but I don't want it to represent me fully.
Yeah.
And that's a big separation. So ultimately, it has an identity. The other side of things is then we have to make sure it gets to just in time, the access it needs just to do the task. So when we look at agentic AI, we don't want these massive agents that have access to everything.
Right.
It needs to be micro agents that are task-based, that are doing some very specific focused things.
Right. Right.
And I think when we look at a lot of the revelations from the FBI about Scattered Spider and so forth, is that if you combine AI with humans, that's very powerful. When you use AI by itself, it's still, it's not quite there yet. Well, it needs human oversight. It needs human interaction.
Yeah.
And that's one of the things I'm finding. I look back at, we do this competition in Estonia every year called Cyberspike.
Right.
And it's the kids, doing capture the flag.
Yeah.
And one of the things was, those who had really good skills and techniques that actually, did really well, but it was the team who won that actually used AI with their skills. They may not have been the best skills, but when you combine it with AI, they move much faster.
Yeah.
And that's what the thing is, like a Formula One race.
Yeah.
When you actually, combine the right technology and the right, people and the skills, you move a little bit faster. And in CTF, speed wins. That's ultimately, speed is what is essential there. And I think that's what's important we have to look at, is that when we combine these really amazing capabilities and technologies with humans together, we can do great things. So we shouldn't look at it as AI replacing humans. AI, will fight AI. We will see AI versus AI algorithms, competing.
Yep.
But when we combine it with human knowledge and human skills, I think that's when great things happen. I think that's what I'm starting to see in this conference, is that we were scared, that is AI going to replace us?
Yeah.
But I think we're getting to reality is that, no, it's complementing us. It's allowing us to do things that we enjoy doing, but faster.
It's funny that you say that, but because I think there is a lot of temptation to replace humans.
Yes.
And not necessarily for job cuts, although we are seeing some, I think it's a little bit of AI washing some of the layoff rounds that are couched in the language of, well, we're doing this for AI efficiency, what have you. But there's an interesting thing. Another story from this week is that Air Canada was just found liable for a mistake made by a customer support AI chatbot that I can't remember exactly the circumstances. They either gave a discount that it shouldn't have or didn't give one that it should have.
I remember this, yes.
And it was basically it doesn't matter if you attributed it to Jeremy or Joseph who wrote the agent, the responsibility and the accountability rolls up to the organization. So I think like that's something to keep in mind. Now, I 100% agree that the agent itself, when you think about the ability that it has or the data that it has access to, what have you, yes, time bound, scope bound, just in time, all of that is good. But remember that like that identity is separate from corporate accountability, which I think is an important point to keep in mind. So other sessions, let's talk about the Microsoft keynote for a second. What was your biggest takeaway from that?
Absolutely. One of the biggest takeaways is that, AI is here to stay. There's no going back.
No going back.
One of the key things was around the zero trust was a big topic in that keynote. Also, identity was a massive item. And I was excited again. So for me, it really shows that the power of what's possible.
Yeah.
And the direction we're going.
Yeah.
That was what was really exciting. Yeah. But again, we must be approaching it with responsibility and accountability, and we must approach it with, de-risking it where we possibly can. And there's a bit of a mix between also, North America and EU between regulation and non-regulation. Yeah. And that's my scary part is that, unregulation is kind of giving a free fall. Yeah. And if you don't put the protection in place, it's hard to go back from that. It becomes almost like a GDPR nightmare for many organizations that if we don't do this safely, eventually at some point, I think agentic AI agents will be the next insider threat and the next insider in risk. Yeah. And that's scary. I do expect this year that we might see a data breach, just like they are kind of, going into, is that we might see a data breach that actually might be attributed back to an agentic AI agent. Yep. Unfortunately, a lot of organizations, when we look at actually, attribution and root cause, sometimes they want to find a human at fault because sometimes that's what actually pays out the insurance coverage.
Well, I mean, from a legal perspective, there is no precedent or case law other than this Air Canada case. Yep. And that didn't find a human or an agent, that found an organization kind of at fault or at least liable for the things. But please continue.
Yeah. So I do think, sometimes, because if you do find a process or an agent at fault, that's a technology and that's a process failure. Right. And the insurers will be like, they will pay it out. Yeah. But if you find human at fault, it's much easier, or an organization in general, then that's where you tend to get the coverage. Yeah.
It's interesting though, this question of identity, this question of, let's say, like least privilege, zero trust, and the things that go around that. There's part of me that says, absolutely, we 100% need those things. We needed those things again for, 20 plus years that I've been working in cybersecurity. But I also feel like there is that's a little bit of a future state problem.
Yes.
Or except for the leading edge adopters. Whereas a lot of the, kind of the middle of the pack, if you think about that bell curve of, early adopters, laggards, et cetera, where the middle of the big part of the curve is right now is, I don't even know what AI is going on. And I lack basic visibility, inventory, and kind of monitoring of the AI usage. Does that resonate with you and what you've seen with different organizations that you've interacted with?
Absolutely. I mean, we do have this big element of shadow AI, and organizations don't have full visibility of how much their employees are actually really using it.
Yeah.
And I think this is really, we need to, first of all, have a reset into let's have the visibility. Let's do the discovery. Let's get the understanding about, what is, how AI has been really used by both the organization in what they are aware of, but also the shadow AI that may not have that visibility.
Yeah, that their employees are doing without, getting approval in advance or having a monitoring program in place.
Absolutely. I've seen some statistics this week, which indicates about actually 50% of employees are using AI without the actually oversight or visibility of the organization, which means, potential data loss, potential security issues.
That's right.
Potential, vulnerabilities, potential credential compromise as well.
Yeah.
And without that visibility, we need to get down to the basics again, which is discovery, which is this, asset management.
Yeah.
And it's also about making sure that we're able to put the right security controls in place.
Yeah.
So that we can move faster. Because that's ultimately security helps us move faster in a safe way.
This is one of those things where I feel like there's a chicken and egg argument that very often comes up. And it's, on the one hand, we could sit down and you and I could have a conversation and debate the relative merits of each potential service and then decide and kind of create a gated system where we say, like, we are going to define a governance policy in advance of the things that we are going to allow, and then our employees are going to opt into it. and or at least be constrained by it. And I think that's a very idealistic approach towards it, but it also has a risk in my mind a little bit to the point of like AI is here to stay. And I think there's this FOMO element that, you know, if you're not adopting it, your competitors sure as heck are, and they're going to gain an advantage over you. But my point on this is that we could take that approach where we kind of like build all our governance policies in advance, or we could take the approach where like a lot of, let's say, like city planners do when they make a park and they want to decide where do you put the paths through the park. You either plan the paths in advance, or you put the park out, you see where the people walk, and then you, wherever the grass gets worn down, you put those paths in. And I think I'm seeing that as an approach from a lot of organizations as well, is where, you know, they finally realize, okay, there's a lot of shadow AI usage happening. Let's actually now discover it, see what of it is good or bad and where risky behaviors have been observed. And then we'll build risk-informed policies that then become our governance overall.
Absolutely.
Two differing approaches. I don't know if you have any particular thoughts on that.
So I mean, I do. One of the things I was fortunate enough to be part of is the EU AI Act. And I was actually working out many years ago. I think we discussed it, on a previous episode. And what I found is that absolutely, I would like organizations to really take an understanding of risk across the organization, where there's things, processes and things that impact human life and really critical decisions. Maybe there's a, situation where those types of things, let's take a slower approach when using AI because the impact is irreversible. And other things that are less risky. Absolutely. Let's adopt, let's embrace, let's move forward with AI. So I think it's really a risk-based approach. So I think it's a bit of a balance. Is that if that park, it was in a dangerous area, then of course you want to plan that. You want it, so
and you have to put fences around the park itself, and maybe have the gates only open at certain hours of the day, and maybe even you have people who kind of watch people coming in and out of the park.
Absolutely. So for me, it's getting the balance right. And I think, it's a top-down approach. The organization and the executives really need to have a strong AI policy. They have to have, and embed that and merge it into the existing security policy. So for me, absolutely, it's about finding that balance. And, so for me, being part of that EU AI Act and looking at, that risk-based approach, for me, I've had the question before, what am I comfortable with AI doing and what am I not comfortable with it doing? Anything that's math-based. It's awesome at it. Let it do those things. Probability based, where it's not basically a critical decision outcome that is best effort. Absolutely great at. When it comes to like life and death situations, scenarios, I'm a bit. Let's use it to help us. But let's have human oversight.
So it's really interesting because this EU AI Act, it's something that we help some of our customers deal with and figure out. Do you have use cases that are either in violation or potentially in violation? And they very often can't make that determination unless they, A, see all the usage that's happening, and B, see all the planned usage that's coming down the pipe through things like code commits and, where AIO is being built into applications and future agents that they want to run. And it leads me to think that there's kind of there's potentially an adoption pattern difference that we're going to see between North America and Europe. Where, to your point, some of these organizations, they say, well, okay, the high-risk use cases we need to be aware of, we need to be cautious about, and the regulators will open up access as we get better and better at, I don't know, let's say like non-deterministically enforcing ethical guardrails and maybe like not having potentials for bias and discrimination, some of these things. Because if I remember right, it's mostly health, finance, and public services where decision-making is potentially in the hands of an AI system that are kind of like prohibited use cases, as I understand right now.
It's not prohibited. What it is that you have to take a risk-based approach of what impacts human life. If there's a high risk to it, then you have to basically follow the regulation and put the right controls in place, the right mitigation. So it's about, the impact ultimately. It's a risk kind of association to the rights of citizens, and therefore, if it gets increased, then you have to make sure that you do it very cautiously. And make sure that you minimize it where possible.
Well, and to that point, one of the analogies that always comes to my mind is, let's say, learning to ride a bicycle. And it's one of those things we say, you learn that skill once and then you get on. If you learn to ride a bicycle and you understand that there are risks, it changes the way that you learn about riding the bicycle. So if you learn that if I ride in a careless, reckless manner, I'm going to fall, I'm going to get hurt, I could break an arm, scrape a knee, whatever it is, that informs how I learned to ride the bicycle. And so these companies that are in the EU that have to think about like, how do I tread those waters of those high risk use cases, as opposed to an organization where there's effectively in, as of yesterday, 49 out of 50 states where there's no regulation around this. You can, crash your bicycle, skin your knee, but it doesn't hurt you. You can break your arm, but it doesn't hurt you. And you just get up and go again. And by the way, there's also no punishment. And there's no organizational accountability. Colorado is the first state to now restrict high risk use cases, which is not defined, but high risk use cases. Fair enough. I mean, we'll see how that plays out. Yeah. I wonder how the difference in organizational maturity and learnings around AI adoption are going to shape up as a result of these kind of differing standards.
No, I completely agree. I use the analogy. I'm a big snowboarder as well, so I love snowboarding. And when I'm snowboarding, what I try to do is minimize the risk where possible of accidents. I'll wear a helmet. I'll wear knee pads. I'll have risk, for guards as well. And for me, it's also being aware of your surrounding situation. So yes, you can do things, and with all of those, if I fall, it's going to hurt. And it can be potentially dangerous. But minimizing, putting the right protections in place, will mean that when I do fall, that I'm minimizing potentially, I can get back up, continue. Versus that if I didn't have those protections or fell, I might end up in a emergency room.
And my one for me, myself personally, I've learned that whenever I feel like I want that one more run, don't nick. Your body is so tired that your risk of falling on that last run of the day that you want to get, I've made this mistake enough times on my snowboard that I just don't do it. I've been out since 10 a.m. in the morning and it's like 5:36 p.m. Like that's actually my limit for the day. And a lot of organizations don't know what their limits are like, because actually I think the organizational maturity level and some of the other things that feed into it around, let's say, do you have good data safeguards? Do you have good permission safeguards, et cetera? All right, I want to move off this topic because we could probably talk about just this all the time. And we've got a couple other things I want to get to. Your talk.
Yes.
Share with the audience what your talk was about and how the audience reception was. And let's say if there were any particular insightful questions that you got out of it.
Absolutely. It was one of my favorite talks to do. Okay. So it's about from cyber war to a digital nation. And it's Estonia's playbook for resiliency. So for me, it's an updated talk where basically I'm taking everyone through the entire, from 1991 to today, into all of the incidents, all of the innovations, and all of the digitalization that the country of Estonia has had. And I really focus on, the last couple of years of how cyber attacks have changed and evolved. When you build really good resiliency into your information systems and the protections and your digital identity, where you've got really strong authentication, authorization. So we've really done a lot around resiliency. And also, using embassy locations for data embassies to actually decentralize the country. So there's lots of protections in place.
By the way, just on that is such a brilliant strategy because, as a lot of people will probably know, that's sovereign territory, right? Within each of those locations. So you have the data sovereignty and the data residency requirements needed to protect that. And I mean, that is super resilient. You think about the diplomatic relations and the kind of distributed storage. From a DR perspective and business continuity, right? If you could reboot the whole country off of any surviving embassy, I don't know what the actual, let's say data sharding is, but anyway, please continue. Sorry to interrupt.
So no, it's absolutely, that's exactly so. And I think sometimes even today, there's a bit of confusion over data sovereignty and data resiliency. And I think, what most countries they want the resiliency, but sometimes the terminology they're using is sovereignty. It feels like sometimes a bit of protectionism, but what they're really looking for is de-risking the impact of the data. So the other part of the talk was really around, how is the attacks evolved. And one of the things I want to highlight is that when you have a certain level of high level resiliency, the attackers and those who are trying to put like disruption and chaos into society, they revert to other means. Sometimes they look for the cheapest mean as well, the cheapest delivery. And in recent years, GPS jamming has been something that we've had to deal with across the border of Estonia. What we've had, you can't do drones. Your navigation systems will not function that well. We've had situations where flights were landing in one of the cities, Tartu, and they had to basically divert it back because the jamming became so strong that it impacted the airport. And then we had to change it to radar-based landing. So you start looking at, how things evolve, and then even in recent years, we've also had in the Baltic Sea, ships dropping their anchors and dragging it along and basically cutting the cables.
Affected.
And another area of basically impacted society. It used to be the energy cables that caused disruption, and then we put resiliency into that. And it was the data cables that gets disrupted. Yeah. So those are the techniques, and we had to look at it's reverting back to the physical aspect of things.
Yeah,
which does ultimately have an impact on your digitalization as well. And I think this is really where we need to start thinking about, how do we kind of improve in that area? How do we become more resilient and more protected over things that might have been challenging in the past to protect? Yeah. So I do see that as, that's been the situations that we've had to deal with in Estonia for the recent years.
Yeah.
And I wanted to highlight that to the rest of the audience and conference here about, that's what we're facing.
Yeah.
We do still see ransomware, but those are the things that disrupt society.
Yeah.
So,
I mean, it's really interesting. So many thoughts go through my head as I think about this. One of them is actually like, if you were a business as opposed to a country.
Yep.
And I know it's not your native country, but like, this would be such a case study in business continuity planning, in disaster recovery, and, cyber resilience has become, I think over the last 5 years, it was something that was maybe in the back of people's minds. But if I think of my history, the 20 plus years, it was always, defend, keep people out of your network. Oh, now I need to keep viruses and malware out. Oh, I need to protect against phishing. Oh, I need to protect against misconfigurations. Oh, I need to protect against, data leakage across a number of external providers that I'm using for SaaS and what have you, and all these kinds of things along the way. Resilience was never a key concept in a lot, even though in that CIA triangle, availability is always there.
Yep.
I think everybody over-indexed on confidentiality and integrity. They did more than they did on availability. But in fact, this resilience and the business continuity and the availability has been, I think, one of the key lessons. And if this was a company as opposed to a country, everyone would be like, those guys nailed it, right? Mm-hmm. The other thing I think about is I think about some of the most famous cases of the last, let's say, 10 years. Mm-hmm. In Maersk and the ransomware attack that they had, they just got lucky as heck that they had one disconnected AD instance in, if I remember right, like either Lagos, Nigeria or Accra, Ghana. And I remember which.
I think it was Nigeria. So
okay.
So
just one port happened to have an intact, copper of the AD that happened to be offline and was, unintentionally air gapped for that point in time. So it didn't get scrambled. And, that was also a nice disaster recovery, but completely, coincidental and accidental.
Lucky. That was so lucky. And they even had to fly somebody into Nigeria to get that system
to get the disk
and bring it back and actually restore everything. But I've seen similar cases as well. A ransomware case that I worked on a couple of years ago, very similar situation where the organization, they became victim to a ransomware attack. And the attackers, they bought access. They went in, they had 2 weeks of basically reconnaissance, the lateral moves, the allocated privileges, gained full access to the Active Directory, did basically then the deployment of ransomware, and completely took everything offline, including the backups.
Yeah.
And the backups were encrypted. So in that situation, that's why I wanted to highlight in my talk about, think about resiliency, think about all those scenarios about when the internet's offline, what's your fallback, when your identity is on not accessible, your IDP is offline, when the power goes out. What is your alternative? Well, how can you keep your business going?
Yeah.
And I want organizations to think more about those scenarios.
Yeah.
And think about even, the best and worst case scenarios. And this organization became a victim of ransomware. What ultimately happened? They were offline. Everything was gone.
Yeah.
Employee history, their financial history, their stock inventory, the contracts employees, money that they paid, everything completely gone.
Yeah.
And again, similar to the Maersk, what saved them was when we're actually doing the asset inventory, we find a system is like, what is this system? And they're like, oh, it's an ERP and a database that was actually migrated from 1 year before.
Okay.
And we're just like, oh my goodness. So we got a system at least this 1 year old.
Yeah.
And they did a hardware migration because the software didn't support the old legacy hardware. And we were just fortunate enough that was actually in the plans for a long time to be decommissioned.
Yeah.
And they just never got around to it.
And been decommissioned.
Just how you decommission.
Yeah.
So we actually used that as a baseline. We used that as the foundation of rebuilding their entire organization.
So that's your recovery point to start from, at least.
Exactly.
Yeah.
It was better than nothing.
Better than nothing, 100%.
And it meant that they had to hire something like 30 people, data analysts that we did scraping. and recreating it. Took 2 months to rebuild the business.
Okay.
And lucky enough, they were able to get all the paper receipts. They were able to get, scrape some of the hard drives and get some of the data back.
Yeah.
But, in that case, they were lucky.
As you said, lucky.
And this is, you want to plan for being lucky.
No.
You want to plan for, having a strong resiliency, a strong simulated, practicing it, and thinking of all the scenarios.
Yeah. When I was getting my MBA, I had a strategy class, and one of my professors in there said, just remember that hope is not a strategy. Yes. And I would say, like, luck is not a strategy. You want to plan around either. One other thing in what you said there, I just want to tap onto as we kind of wrap up. We've gone a little bit longer than I intended for today's episode. Hopefully our audience is still with us. But something that you said in the Estonia case study around, let's say, like the anchor dragging and the GPS jamming and so on, all of that is kind of physical infrastructure that keeps the country running. Mm-hmm. For a lot of companies, that's not how they operate, right? Smaller companies, digital native companies, born in the cloud, whatever, you don't have to think about a lot of the physical infrastructure. Mm-hmm. And that, to me, brings it to that shared responsibility model that all of us are familiar with. Your cloud vendors, et cetera, they provide your confidentiality and availability, integrity of their platforms, and then they provide the security of the platforms. Mm-hmm. And then you're responsible for your security in the platforms. Yes. And one of the things that I think about is, like, most organizations wouldn't take those layers into account in their business continuity or resilience planning. They wouldn't think about, well, what if my actual critical vendor went down? What if I actually lost access to AWS? And just in the past couple of weeks, we've actually seen that be the case with one AWS region going completely offline due to drone attack. So I think there's a renewed focus on resiliency, and I think it's probably a little bit overdue, and it sucks that it takes these kinds of events to bring it back into our mind. But remember, like, what is the resiliency that you're responsible for? What are the layers of that kind of shared responsibility that you can think about? All right. So in summary for me, just to wrap up today's episode, and we'll get your final thoughts to close us out. AI everywhere.
Yes.
Multiple flavors of it. AI that's bringing efficiency to cybersecurity, but then also cybersecurity to allow secure AI adoption within organizations. Non-human identities, least privilege, hopefully, ideally, that we hopefully get better at, but also then the responsibility and accountability of the organization. A little bit back to that shared responsibility model. Maybe Joseph messed it up. Maybe Jeremy messed it up. But whatever company employs them is on the hook for.
They're responsible and accountable.
Absolutely. Other themes, resiliency, renewed focus on that, which is, again, I think a little bit overdue. Mm-hmm. Anything we missed?
No, I think you've covered a great summary of everything. But I think overall, the networking part, bringing people together.
Yeah,
that has been. The only way we can do this successfully is through sharing and collaboration.
Yeah.
Again, shared responsibility, but not just as an organization, but as a community. And that's what allows us to move forward at a quicker pace.
Yeah, absolutely. I do think that information sharing is something that is so critical. Mm-hmm. I myself haven't participated in a lot of the ISACs, and I've been talking to my team about, like, we should absolutely get in there. One of the funniest things is, I work at a venture-backed startup, and there's such a push for competitive advantage and whatnot. Mm-hmm. If all of us who are working on helping organizations secure AI adoption together, we could probably advance the whole space quicker.
Yes, we could.
One of the things I try from my own perspective to do, just as somebody working in this space, is, we do our This Week in AI Security, 15-minute weekly podcast about all the things. I try as much as possible. I don't make it all about us at Firetail. I give credit where credit's due to other researchers who are finding these things. Surfacing all of that, sharing all of it, to your point about, information sharing, and we can all learn so much better. One of the things I always tell my team in our annual things is that all of us together are smarter than any of us individually.
That for me, that's what's always helped me in my career, is that, I have a certain, knowledge in my area of expertise, but in order for me to move forward and really get lots of insights, it's surrounding myself with amazing people like yourself, like Miko and others who really have supported me and help fill in the knowledge what I don't have.
Yeah.
And that's what's key, is that, it's community. Yeah. It's a team effort, and all of us kind of working together. We work better, we work more efficient.
Yep.
And we move faster. So that's what's always fun, is that it's a social kind of involvement.
Yep.
And that's what makes us different.
Awesome. Joseph Carson, thank you so much for taking the time to join us to recap RSAC, RSAC conference. I'm not sure what the official name of it is anymore, but to recap RSAC 2026 and to our modern cyber listeners, we will talk to you on next week's episode. Thank you so much. Bye-bye.